The secret to feeling aligned in life is actually through misalignment. Not from having all the answers, but actually from knowing what's not meant for you. What do I mean by this? That is what we're going to talk about in today's episode. So in my own journey, I've gone through countless jobs that have felt misaligned, constant relationships, whether it be romantic or friendships that did not serve me, places and environments that made me feel anxious and insecure, difficult transitions where I felt misaligned and unhappy, times that I've really been pressured to do the deep work and ask myself, what do I want from life? All of these have not been fun, have not been comfortable, but through all this, I've learned the most invaluable lesson, which is that actually living aligned means continuing to just take small steps away from what's misaligned, away from those things that we actually are learning doesn't serve us. And that is the path. So all of these situations that I've described are difficult, right? They're uncomfortable. They're things that we normally run away from. But the first thing I want to talk about is in learning that misalignment is the biggest teacher in our life. I've learned to embrace these hard times. I now see every single experience in this life as a teacher, as something that's intentionally here to teach us something, to guide us towards something or away from something. And I'm at a place where I honestly no longer fear or resist these difficult times. I've even gotten to a place where even when I'm in the midst of it, I know it's here for a reason, and I know it's here to guide me and teach me, even if that's not overnight, even if that lesson takes a month to kind of set in and it takes me a month to get to that place where I'm actually ready to take steps away from it. I know it's here to teach me. So an example that I want to share, just a few months ago, I was having a really hard time. It was middle of winter. I wasn't happy in my current job. I was really just feeling like a lack of energy, lack of spark in creating for the podcast, and just didn't feel like my happy self. And this lasted for a few months. And even in the midst of those months, I had no idea what that time was here to teach me. And I honestly had no idea what the future was going to look like. But what I did know is that difficult time was there to push me away from certain things in my life that were misaligned. So my job, I was working in a hedge fund and I was really unhappy there. I was there every single day of the week for the most part. And it was an environment where the energy just really wasn't serving me. And it was work that I really did not value. And it was taking away a lot of my energy and, quite honestly, my happiness. And I knew that I had to get to this low point to get the courage to finally walk away from that. So since then, I have left that job, and stepping away from that misalignment in my life, I already feel so much more in alignment, so much more energized, so much more free. But it took going through that hard time to learn what was misaligned, to actually slow down and get curious as to okay, why am I in this difficult place? What is this here to teach me? What's misaligned that I need to take steps away from here? And it wasn't just the job that was causing that low point for me. I also came to the conclusion that, okay, my time in New York City, I think, might be coming to an end. I think this environment and this pace and this hustle no longer is something that excites me, but rather is something that is a bit misaligned with my values right now. I think I'm honestly valuing more slowing down and being more intentional. And when I think about the life I want to live, I think of waking up in an environment where I can live a day to day that I truly love. And I've come to realize that New York City is no longer that vehicle for me. It was really exciting when I moved here and I loved that fast-paced environment. But I think that low point was also here to nudge me towards making a move, towards making a change. So yes, that's some fun background in my personal life, but this is more to help give you an example of a hard time that was here to show me what was misaligned in order for me to take steps towards something that is more aligned. Because think of it this way too. If I didn't have that hard time, if I didn't have those few months of really feeling unhappy, I wouldn't have come to these conclusions. I wouldn't have been motivated to make this change towards alignment. If I didn't feel so misaligned in those areas in my life during that time, I wouldn't now be feeling so much more aligned from taking action. So if we don't go through these experiences that show us what's really misaligned, we're never going to know. We're never going to know if something's right for us or not if we don't experience it. And again, it's not that that experience isn't going to feel uncomfortable or difficult, but knowing that it's here for a reason, knowing that that misalignment is there to guide you towards alignment can really help give you clarity. And this is a question we need to constantly ask ourselves, what feels misaligned in life? Because the truth is, as human beings, we are constantly changing. We're constantly growing internally. Our values are constantly changing. Our personality is constantly changing and adapting. Who we surround ourselves by is constantly changing. Our lives are constantly changing, and so are we with it. An aligned life is not going to look the exact same for any of us. It's constantly evolving as we are. What might feel aligned today might be totally different a year from now, especially 5 or 10 years from now. And I think of this idea that we're all pressured to make like a 1, 5, 10-year plan, right? And I always felt resistance towards that because I know this truth that we are constantly changing. How am I supposed to know what I want to do a year from now, or let alone 5 years or 10 years from now? How am I supposed to know what will make me feel aligned in those moments in the future if I feel like what makes me feel aligned a week from now is already a little bit different? And so that's why it's also really helpful to constantly assess and analyze what feels misaligned. Those are the hints and signals that are constantly coming up that are guiding us towards that alignment. So think of the friendships in your life, right? Maybe there's certain friendships that felt really aligned, really good in your life at one point, but then you go through some changes, or maybe they go through some changes. You're both probably going through changes. And a year later, that friendship might feel a bit misaligned. You guys might no longer have the same interests, no longer have the same values. Something feels misaligned there. That is your guide, your signal, your nudge to maybe start to distance from that person. Not in a negative way, but we are meant to evolve out of many friendships. Not every single friendship is meant to be a lifelong friendship, and you don't have to force it just because it was an aligned friendship 1 year ago. Same thing with our career path. Same thing really with anything in life. Something that felt aligned a year ago, a month ago, does not necessarily mean that it has to align right now. And the sooner that we can get honest with ourselves about what actually does feel misaligned, the sooner we can work up the courage to take steps towards that alignment. And again, that alignment is just taking steps away from that misalignment. So everyone's always talking about this idea of finding balance in life, right? But the interesting thing about balance is there's no perfect balance. There's no balance we strike that suddenly we're just in balance for the rest of our lives. It's a constant seesaw. And that's the same exact case with alignment and misalignment. We are constantly balancing this seesaw of taking steps away from what isn't aligned, taking steps towards what feels aligned. And that's constantly changing in our lives. There's going to be constantly things that start to feel misaligned, and we can constantly take steps away from that. But then coming back to this 5-year plan example, right? It really makes that difficult because if we have tunnel vision on this 5-year plan that we made years ago when we were probably an entirely different person, isn't that plan probably going to feel pretty misaligned? And if we are so set on sticking to that plan, we're not going to give ourselves permission to take steps away from that if it starts to feel misaligned. We're not going to be able to open our eyes up to all of the other possibilities and opportunities that might feel a lot more aligned in our lives. And so that's my personal take. Maybe a 5-year plan for you could be a really great way to stick to your goals and continue down a certain path. But I think it is important to maybe continue down that path, but pivot along that path. Make it like a zigzag path, right? Like if certain things in that plan are starting to really feel misaligned, take steps away from that because there might be a door that works a lot better to achieve your goals. Or maybe a goal that feels a lot more aligned that you would be closed off to if you didn't give yourself permission to take steps away from what feels misaligned. A really big area, I think a lot of us probably feel this, is careers, right? Especially if we're early on in our careers. But quite honestly, I'm going to remove that narrative. Any point in your career, at any age you're at, because we're constantly making pivots and changes. And you hear of constant successful people talk about all the changes they make throughout their careers. But let's say you go to college, you study a certain degree in college like a lot of us have, and you feel kind of trapped on this path. They tell you okay, this is your major, this is what you're going to do, these are the stepping stones to get there, and this is your life career path. And it's kind of terrifying because you're pressured to pick this path and this major when you're 18, maybe 19 or 20 for your whole career. At least that's what they tell you. And so personally, I went into finance and accounting, which led me to that hedge fund job that I was describing in the beginning. And I didn't like it at all. It honestly felt misaligned from the start. And it took me 4 years to build up the courage to step away from that stability, to get to a point where I felt so misaligned and so unhappy to make a change. And I think 99% of people out there probably feel misaligned with what they studied in college, but it's scary to make a change, right? Your whole resume is that degree, or, who's going to hire me, right? If I have only experience in this one realm. If that realm feels misaligned, that is the only sign you need to take a step away from it. Because alignment will only come from stepping away from that misalignment. And yes, it feels scary. It feels uncomfortable because making any change away from what feels quote safe and quote comfortable, yeah, there is discomfort along with that. And that is scary. But if you want to live a life that feels more aligned, again, the only way to do that is to take steps away from what feels misaligned. So if it is that career, know that there is something so much more aligned for you out there. And it's okay that if stepping away means feeling like you're taking a couple steps back, because those few steps back is going to lead to progressing miles forward and feeling a lot more happy and aligned in life. And isn't really that the end goal? So maybe you know what feels misaligned, right? Maybe it's that career, maybe it's the relationship, maybe it's the friendships, maybe it's the city you're living in, whatever is coming to mind for you, you have the thing that feels misaligned, right? But I think what keeps a lot of us stuck in what feels misaligned is not knowing what the alternative is going to be. And that's the last point I want to drive in here, is that you don't have to know the answers. In fact, none of us know the answers. The most successful people and the happiest people, I would argue, in life, at least something that's made me really happy in these past few years, is giving myself permission to take risks and make change while not knowing what the outcome's going to be, but simply feeling comforted in the fact that I am stepping away from what feels misaligned and trusting that that is bringing me more towards alignment. And that's all you need to know. All you need to know is that this current job or this current relationship feels misaligned, so I'm going to start taking steps away from it. You don't have to have an exact picture or visual or control over what the next steps are going to look like or what your future is going to look like. Of course, it's probably good to have a bit of a high level plan, right? Or other goals to work towards. But for so long, I feel like until I had like such a set alternative, something concrete in stone, another safety net to jump into, I wouldn't let myself jump ship. Whether it be leaving a relationship that felt comfortable, whether it be leaving a job that felt stable and familiar, whether it be leaving a friend group worried that I was going to be alone if I distanced from them without having a million other friends. When I was speaking to that example of when I was really unhappy a few months ago, I didn't know what was next when I quit my job. I didn't even quite honestly know what city I was going to move to when I decided to leave New York. What I did know was that I felt so misaligned that this change needed to happen. It really wasn't an option because the alternative was staying in these situations that felt misaligned and spending more of my life in those circumstances that really, honestly, were draining my energy and making me feel unhappy. That was the alternative. And so I knew undoubtedly that I would prefer the uncertainty and taking a risk towards alignment rather than staying in a situation that 100% would continue to make me feel misaligned. And a big part of this too, at least for me, is trusting in a higher power. When you let go of control, of trying to have all of the answers, you can do that because you can remind yourself that you are being divinely guided by a bigger source. Now, whether that be God for you, whether that be the universe, whether that be just like an unnamed bigger source, right? Something that you know you're being guided by. There is something bigger here. Every single thing in every one of our lives is intentional and here for a reason because we're all being divinely guided. And so when life feels uncertain, when you don't know the answers, and when you're taking that risk and making that change with that uncertainty, remind yourself that you are being guided towards that path of alignment and that you can have that courage and that strength to step away from what feels misaligned and come back to trust, come back to turning to that higher power and asking for the answers. Taking one step at a time. You don't need to have all the answers right now. All you need to know is what today looks like, right? Take that next step. Continue to take those steps away from what feels misaligned, whether that be a small step or in a big way. Because if you continue to take those steps away from what feels misaligned, suddenly you're going to be living a life that feels far more aligned. Not trying to have all the answers, not trying to control, not trying to have tunnel vision on that 5-year plan, but assessing every day what's working here, what feels misaligned. If we want to live a life that feels truly aligned, it means constantly staying open and finding the courage to pivot according to what we feel internally. What's our intuition telling us? Trust that feeling of misalignment. And you can trust that you are being guided by a higher power. You don't need to know all the answers. No matter how scary that uncertainty might feel, I promise you that taking steps away from that misalignment in your life will 100% be worth it. If I can do it, I know you can too. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to press follow or subscribe, leave a rating or review or comment on the show. All of this would mean the world to me. And I'll see you all again soon on your journeys to living more fulfilled.